I woke up feeling wrong. Not sick, not sore, just off. Like my body didn't quite fit right. Like a shirt that had shrunk in the wash but only in certain places. I blinked at the ceiling, my blankets pooling around me, and swung my legs over the side of the bed, reaching for my slippers. That's when I noticed the first thing. They were too big. Not dramatically, not in a way that screamed something is terribly wrong, just enough to make me pause. My heel didn't sit where it should. There was extra space at the toe. I wiggled my foot, testing it. Had I bought a new pair and forgotten? Maybe they stretched out overnight? Shaking my head, I stood up, brushing it off as morning grogginess. I had work to get to. No time for weird, half-awake thoughts. By the time I was in the kitchen making coffee, I'd nearly forgotten about the slippers. But then came the second thing. I wrapped my fingers around my favorite mug, the one I'd used every morning for years, and lifted it. It felt wrong. Not heavy, not awkward, just big. I stared at my hand. The handle seemed thicker. Had my grip always looked like that? The rim of the mug, when I sipped, felt larger against my mouth. It was subtle, just enough to make my stomach twist. I put it down and shook out my hands. Maybe I'd slept weird, and my fingers were stiff, or maybe I was still half dreaming. But the unease lingered. At work, I forced myself to push it all away. Be normal. Act normal. Emails, meetings, spreadsheets. I lost myself in the routine, convincing myself that nothing was actually wrong. But every so often, small things would pull me back. My sleeves bunched at the wrists more than usual. My keyboard felt bigger under my fingers. At lunch, my coworker Josh made an offhand comment that nearly made my heart stop. "You look different today, man. You lose weight?" I laughed it off, pretending it was just a bad night's sleep, but my mind was racing. Weight loss didn't explain this. Weight loss didn't make objects feel bigger in your hands. I kept stealing glances at myself in reflective surfaces, shop windows, the bathroom mirror, but I looked the same. Didn't I? Maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe this was stress, exhaustion, some weird optical illusion. I told myself that all the way home. That night, standing in my bedroom, I hesitated before pulling off my shirt. I was just being paranoid. But what if I wasn't? Heart pounding, I walked to the full-length mirror and really looked at myself. My clothes hung looser. My collar looked just a little wider. My hands trembled as I stepped closer. It was too much to be in my head. Wasn't it? I shut my eyes, exhaling sharply. Sleep. That's what I needed. Tomorrow, everything would be normal. Still, as I crawled into bed, my blankets felt heavier than usual. And as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sinking into something much, much larger than myself. I woke up with my sheets tangled around me like a net. My first thought was that the bed felt off, too wide, too deep. That creeping wrongness from the day before returned, stronger now, clawing at the edges of my mind. I swung my legs over the side and slipped my feet into my slippers. They felt even bigger. I yanked them off and stared. Maybe I'd stretched them out by mistake. Maybe my feet were just swollen yesterday and had gone back to normal overnight. I stood up and my pajama pants slid down my hips. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. No, this isn't happening. At work, I did everything I could to ignore it. I layered up, a tight undershirt beneath my dress shirt, an extra pair of socks stuffed into my shoes. If I was getting smaller, I wasn't going to let anyone notice. And for the most part, it worked. No one gave me any weird looks. No one commented. I started to convince myself I was being ridiculous, that my clothes had stretched, or maybe my weight had dropped more than I realized. Then I reached for my coffee cup. I had to adjust my grip to hold it properly. A sharp, cold panic stabbed through my chest. I set it down, my hands trembling. My co-workers were talking about weekend plans, oblivious to the fact that my world was cracking apart. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe, to focus, to act normal. After work, I went home, locked the door, and measured myself. I just had to. I grabbed a pencil and pressed my back against the wall, marking my height the way kids do to track growth. Then I checked the number. I had lost an inch. My head spun. That wasn't possible. That wasn't something that happened. Adults don't shrink. My lungs felt too tight. My hands were clammy. I nearly ripped the tape measure in my rush to check again. But no matter how many times I measured, the answer was the same. 1 inch gone. Vanished. I spent hours online, searching for anything that might explain this. Hormonal issues? Pituitary tumors? I dove down medical rabbit holes, but nothing made sense. Even the conditions that caused slight height loss were gradual, happening over years. I was shrinking overnight. Every now and then, I'd stumble across something that made my skin crawl. Fringe forums with half-mad users whispering about vanishing folk or shrinking curses. Stories of people who got smaller and smaller until they disappeared. I slammed my laptop shut. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was exhausted, stressed. Maybe I'd marked my height wrong. Maybe the tape measure was off. I forced myself to go to bed, telling myself that when I woke up, everything would be fine. The next morning, my shoes wouldn't stay on my feet. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding, staring at them. I was still shrinking. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't stress. I was getting smaller. I didn't go to work that day. I stayed home, pacing my apartment, trying to figure out what to do. Go to the doctor? Call someone? But what if they thought I was insane? What if they locked me up? What if there was nothing they could do? By nightfall, I was exhausted but too terrified to sleep. Because what if I woke up even smaller? What if one day I woke up and I was gone? I stopped measuring myself. It didn't matter anymore. I knew what was happening. Each morning, my clothes fit worse. The world stretched taller around me, and my own reflection felt less like my own. I started avoiding mirrors, avoiding my own hands, because that was the worst part. It wasn't just my height. My fingers looked thinner, my wrists narrower, like my bones were shrinking, my entire proportions subtly warping. I didn't just feel smaller. I felt wrong. I barely left my apartment. The outside world felt too big, too loud. People stared at me in ways that made my skin crawl. Or maybe they didn't, but I thought they did. And that was bad enough. I stayed inside, glued to my laptop, searching for anything that might explain this. Official sources gave me nothing, but the deeper I dug, the more I found unsettling things. There were stories, buried in obscure blogs, abandoned forums, places no one should ever waste time looking. People describing the same thing, waking up smaller, feeling the world stretch around them. Some claimed it had happened gradually, like me. Others all at once, waking up inches shorter with no explanation. And none of them had answers. The ones who posted updates always said the same thing. I think it's getting worse. I don't know what to do. Then, nothing. No follow-ups. No closure. Just disappearance. Like they had been erased. Like they had shrunk away to nothing. That night, I had a dream. I was small, running through a house that wasn't mine but felt familiar. The walls stretched up forever, the furniture towering like cliffs. The air smelled dusty, like old wood and forgotten things. I turned a corner, and something was there. Not a person, not even an animal. Something with long fingers. A shadow with too many joints, too many limbs, creeping toward me on all fours. Watching, waiting. I woke up gasping, tangled in sheets that felt too heavy, too large. I didn't sleep the rest of the night because I had that dream before. When I was a kid, I had dreamed of that house, that thing, over and over. It had terrified me then, but I had forgotten. Or maybe I had forced myself to forget. But now it was back, and I had the horrible, creeping feeling that it wasn't just a dream. The next morning, I almost drowned in my own sink. I had turned the faucet on, splashing water onto my face, trying to shake off the exhaustion. But when I leaned forward, I slipped. My arms weren't strong enough to push me back up. The basin stretched wide around me. Water rushed over my nose, my mouth, my eyes. For a split second, I thrashed, truly panicked, before managing to push myself out, gasping. I sat there, drenched and shivering, staring at the sink like it was a predator that had almost eaten me whole. This wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It wasn't just terrifying. It was dangerous. I wasn't just shrinking. I was losing control of my world, and I didn't know if I could stop it. I stopped answering my phone. Texts, calls, voicemails. I ignored them, all. It wasn't safe to see anyone. If I did, they'd notice. They'd realize something was wrong with me. And then what? A hospital? A psych ward? I couldn't risk it. So I cut myself off. By the end of the week, my apartment had become a maze of oversized furniture. The countertops were impossible to reach. The fridge loomed like a metallic wall, its handle high above my head. I had to climb onto the counter just to reach water. That's how bad it had gotten. And the stairs. I almost broke my leg trying to get down them. I missed a step and fell forward, rolling halfway down before slamming against the wall. I lay there, dazed, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how weak I'd become. Everything was a risk now. Even my own home was turning against me. Then came the noises in the walls. At first, I thought it was just mice. I'd heard them before, little scratching sounds behind the drywall. But these noises weren't small. They were heavy, deliberate, pacing, like something large was inside the walls, moving around. I pressed my ear against the drywall one night, listening. Something shifted in the dark, and for the first time in days, I felt a different kind of terror, because it wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was closer. The next morning, my shoes wouldn't stay on my feet at all. They slipped right off as I walked, flopping uselessly against the floor. I was shrinking too fast now. The worst part? I was starting to forget how big I used to be. I looked at my clothes, my furniture, my phone on the coffee table, and I couldn't remember what normal was supposed to feel like anymore. Had my hands always been this small? Had doorknobs always been that high? My own memories were warping. I had never felt so alone. Then I made a mistake. I answered a call. It was my sister, Amanda. I don't even know why I picked up. Maybe I just wanted to hear another person's voice. Maybe I thought I could pretend everything was fine. But the moment I spoke, she knew. "Jesus, you sound terrible. Are you sick?" I hesitated. My voice was weaker, higher, like it didn't fit in my throat anymore. "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not. What's going on? I tried to visit the other day, but you weren't home." She had come here? Panic seized my chest. I imagined her knocking on my door, peering through the windows, seeing my oversized clothes tossed around like shed skin. My voice cracked. I was so tired. "I just need rest, okay?" Silence. Then, "I'm coming over." "Don't," I blurted. "Please, just, just give me a few days." Another pause, this one longer. "What's happening to you?" she whispered. I wanted to tell her. I almost did. But what could she do? What could anyone do? If I told her, she'd just think I was insane. Or worse, she'd try to take me somewhere. And I couldn't let that happen. So I hung up. And then I turned off my phone. Amanda would come eventually. I knew that. But I'd deal with it later. If I was still big enough to open the door when she arrived. That night, the scratching came back. Louder. Closer. I lay in bed, clutching my two big sheets around my body, listening. Something was moving through my house, and I had the horrible feeling that it had been here long before I noticed. It had just been waiting. I woke up gasping, tangled in fabric that wasn't my sheets. It took me a second to understand. I was trapped inside my own pajamas. They had become a suffocating mess of fabric around me, the sleeves twisted like ropes, the collar too wide and gaping. I thrashed, struggling free, stumbling onto the floor. The carpet felt rougher than usual against my bare skin, and that's when I realized I was small, too small, no taller than a child now. My apartment was a different world. The doorknobs loomed out of reach. The couch was a monolithic structure, its shadows stretching long across the floor. My own clothes, discarded and baggy, looked like hollowed-out corpses strewn across the room. I took a shaky breath. I needed to get to my phone. I needed help. The coffee table. That's where I'd left it. But the table was impossibly high now, and the phone lay at the center like a relic in a shrine. No way to reach it. I was trapped. And then the scratching started again. It was no longer in the walls. It was inside the room with me. A low, skittering sound. Too fast. Too heavy. Not a mouse. Not a rat. Something else. I spun around. Something moved behind the couch. I froze. Long, spindly fingers slipped out from the darkness. Too many joints. Too smooth, curling slightly before disappearing again. It knew I saw it, and it was waiting. I ran. I had no plan, no destination, just raw instinct screaming at me to go. My own home had become a sprawling labyrinth of monstrous furniture, my movements clumsy, desperate. I skidded under the table, the wood stretching endlessly above me. The shadows shifted. It was following me. The scratching was faster now, closer. I ducked behind a bundle of power cords, squeezing myself into the tight space. A hiding spot. If I could just stay still. Something brushed my ankle. I bit back a scream. I turned my head slowly, heartbeat slamming against my ribs, and I saw it. It was crouched in the darkness. Not human, not even close. Its limbs were too long, too thin. It moved like a puppet without strings. Its black, glassy eyes locked onto me. But its mouth, oh God, its mouth was just like mine, like it had studied me, like it had been watching me shrink and was trying to match my size. And now that I was small enough, it was coming for me. A sudden booming sound rattled the air. I flinched. The thing scuttled back into the dark. Footsteps. Someone was outside. For the first time in days, hope flooded through me. Amanda. It had to be her. I ran toward the window, but my legs were so small now, my movements sluggish. The fabric of my own clothes dragged behind me like a parachute. I reached the wall, struggling to climb up to the window. The headlights of her car cut through the darkness. She was here. She was so close. But then I looked down at myself, at my tiny, trembling hands, and I knew the truth. Even if she came inside, she wouldn't see me. I was too small now, and by the time she reached the door, I would be even smaller. The last thing I heard was the scratching, creeping closer in the dark, waiting for me to disappear.